Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In this video, today I'm doing somewhat of a redraw of an old painting I did a few years back. One of my characters is Lady Eve. I haven't painted her portrait since then, I guess because I didn't care for her design as much, but I thought I'd give it a go again. I never really cared for the original portrait, and I guess that kind of discouraged me with her designs. I did end up renewing her outfit design, which I really liked, and her hair is different from the old version. I'll actually have a picture up on the screen so that you can see that. When I'm painting a portrait with watercolor, I always start with the skin, and I use the wet on wet method. So I put a layer of water over top the skin, so that when I put the paint on top, it blends out smoothly, helping give more soft skin-like texture. Now, I realized when I started painting the skin, these really dark dots were appearing on the face, and I didn't know what they were from, but they were really starting to frustrate me, and I didn't know how to fix them. I couldn't get rid of them. They just remained there, and I don't know if I ever realized what caused them, because I have used the wet on wet method before many times, and with this specific paper. So I didn't quite know what was going on, but I did hope that it would clear up, or at least not show, as I got further on in the painting. And I was working in layers too. When you use the wet on wet method with skim, you put the first layer of water on and then paint. And as soon as it starts to get dry to the point where you have to use your brush to help blend it out, then you stop and let it dry completely. And then you go and add another layer of water over top, and then you build on top of that again and again. And there got to be a time when I stopped using that method because I wanted clean, crisp lines. And I guess I didn't want to deal with more of the dark dots showing up, which I couldn't stand. All of the paints that I'm using for this painting, besides the acrylic paints that I use at the end, are from Mozart Supplies. Now, they did change their brand name, which I can't remember exactly what it is now. It is still similar to Mozart Supplies, but it's a little different. I'll try and remember to have it linked in the description below so you guys can possibly check that out. Now, over the years of using watercolors to paint skin, I've found a mixture of colors and paints that I find I really like for a skin tone, which are the burnt sienna. I'll use that, and then sometimes I'll use a shade darker than that if I want to darken the skin tone. And then I like to use red, specifically the pinkish red on the palette. And then I'll use a almost golden yellow. Now, depending on where I put the paint, I will add either cold colors or dark colors depending on where I put the paint. So in the shadows on her face, I tended to put more blue in the skin tone, and in the lighter areas, such as in highlights such on her forehead and cheeks and stuff, I added more yellow to the paint, yellows and oranges, to give it a variety of life and color. For a blush tone, I like to mix the same colors I mix for the skin tone, but then I add a lot more reds and pinks to give it a more rosy look and coloring. Now, I don't have a lot more to say about the skin, except that I'm just constantly building up and preserving the highlights, deepening certain shadows. If you didn't notice already, I tend to save the eyes for last. In fact, in past paintings, I will save the eyes for like last, even after everything else in the painting is done. And I started to change that sometime maybe last year, because I don't know why. I guess I felt like it was unnecessary or creepy, one of the two. So I do add her eye color. I do color her eyes before the end of the painting. So I already colored the lips, but I will say that the coloring I used for the lips is pretty much the same as the skin tone, only more blushy and pinky, close to the blush color, which I add later on. But it's around the same, and I did use more blues to shade in the shadows of her lips. So that's normally how I color them. Now for the hair, I used a similar method to the skin, only not for a long period of time. To begin with, I started with the wet on wet method just to block out shapes and darker shadows, and then after that I just started building up without using it because I was getting too frustrated with the dark dots that were mysteriously appearing across the painting. I did not like that. If you didn't notice, in this painting I'm doing Eve's hair slightly differently than the last one, because in the old painting the rainbow in her hair was kind of dispersed throughout it and it wasn't very organized, definitely not in the proper color order for a rainbow. And I drew her sometime last year where I rearranged her hair to look better, and I put the rainbow in her hair in a better order, which is exactly how you see it here. Her hair is supposed to be iridescent almost to the light in a certain part of her hair. And of course I use the same colors in the rainbow throughout her hair later on, just in some shadows or highlights, but it's more visible and vibrant in the actual rainbow. In the original, she is holding a sword-looking thing. It's actually a long unicorn horn, which I decided to give her when I was younger. I mean, I look at it now, I mean, it's fine. You know, my younger self, whatever. But she had a rainbow also flying almost through, like across the page. And of course, that would have been neat to incorporate. And the background too. And I did give it a background, but a very disappointing background. One that I fixed. I did not like how the background turned out at the end. I feel like I destroyed the entire thing doing that. So I do paint over it, don't worry. I feel like when I added the background at the end, it kind of pulled away from the contrast that I had with her standing out of the page. And I kind of wish the background was lighter. But, you know, it is what it is. I color it almost like a rainbow. I use multiple colors in the background. And then when I go to fix it, I go over with one solid color because I felt like multiple colors were just too distracting, especially when she had a rainbow in her hair. Yeah, and I think that's the reason why I didn't care much for the last one, is because there was just too much going on in the painting overall. Too many colors, too many bright lights. There weren't dark enough shadows, and if there were, they were kind of placed wrong to where it just kind of messed up the whole look of everything. Something that came to mind the other day when I was painting it is that I'm using the exact same paints as the paints I used when I painted the old one. Exact same paints. The only difference between the two paintings, really, I guess, is just improvement. Because they're both the same paints, except there's time between them, I guess. Time for improvement. Things like that. Before I really got into coloring or painting portraits and illustrations and such, I had the idea that I was never going to color my drawings because I felt like every time I colored them or painted them, they'd turn out so horrible. So I decided I was going to be a drawer, someone who just sketches or draws. One day, however, I picked up a palette of watercolor paints and decided to paint a portrait. And even though when I look back at that portrait, I see it wasn't the greatest, of course, but that's because I've improved. But at the time, I thought it was so good. So I kept on painting. I kept on using watercolors. And of all the mediums for me to get into and stuff, it was watercolor. So thank you to watercolors for existing. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, I've used those ever since. Same brand too. The same brand of watercolors I'm using today is the same brand I started with. Before I sped up this video, it was originally almost 5 hours long. So it took me quite a while to paint this, let alone actually drawing it. And then I spent some time off camera on the background and also fixing it after I destroyed it. So I painted the background on camera, and then I think off camera I attempted to fix it, which made it worse. And then a couple days later, I think it was it was Saturday, yeah. Then I fixed it with some acrylic paints, which, thanks to my mom for giving me the idea of that, and thanks to one of my aunts for providing the acrylic paint that I needed, because my white was missing. Couldn't find it anywhere, which is kind of weird because I have lots of acrylic paints. They're just somewhere in this house, but I don't know where. Here's where I start to add more detail in the hair, giving it more strands so it doesn't just look like one block of paint. It helps add detail. And it was kind of last minute that I decided to make it look like her hair was being blown a little in the wind. I felt like it added more interest to the piece, made it look less boring. Let me know down in the comments what kind of videos you'd be interested in seeing me do. I do have a list going. I have 2 lists of ideas, but I'd love to hear some ideas from you guys, and I'll see what I can do. There comes a point in a painting where you just where you finished everything else for the most part, and you're just putting stuff here and there where you think it could use a little more of this, a little more of that, details, more contrast, such and such. That's pretty much what I'm doing here. This is where I ruin the background. I look back at it in the recording, and I mean, the leaf-looking things in the background look fine. I mean, at least the green ones. And then I start adding more and more stuff. It's a little painful to watch, almost. I don't know. Like, I like the green leaves in the background there. They actually look kind of nice. If it were just the green leaves and I could go back in time, I would have positioned them a little differently. But, no, I wasn't thinking, apparently. I had an idea of what I wanted for the background, but I had that reference photo on my iPad, and my iPad was recording. So instead of looking back at it, I was too lazy to take my iPad down from the mount and look at it, so I just went with something I made up in my head, I guess. And I was liking it at first, And then I realized it was not at all what I had wanted, and it was quite different from what I had tried to remember in my head from the reference that I had found somewhere on Instagram. I feel like it kind of has a stained glass window look, and of course that's fine, but I felt like it was too distracting for my eyes. It took something away from the portrait, and I didn't care for that. So my first attempt to fix it was a fail. My second attempt was a lot better. And of course, it could have been better. I mean, going over it with acrylic kind of caused it to lose the watercolor texture on the paper, which was a little disappointing, but I think it turned out fine in the end. I like the background that I gave it. Right now I'm just using my colored pencils to go in and darken and define certain areas, and of course I use the white paint for highlighting. Here is where I start to fix it. I start going over it with white around the portrait to help add more contrast, and then I started doing it to everywhere around it, making everything more pastel, and that did not help at all. It just made it look worse. Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. I ended up dropping it and thinking there was nothing else I could do, so I just eventually decided to be done. But then after a couple hours, I found that I just couldn't look at it without feeling disappointed, I guess, in myself. So I was determined to go back and fix it whenever I could. And so, it's a new day, and here's the finished piece. I love the purple background. I like how it turned out. I am a little sad that it took away the watercolor texture and gave it more of a almost a canvasy, acrylic-y texture, but it is what it is, and I feel like it looks way better, adds way more contrast. And of course, here are the acrylics I used. The white one, again, is from my aunt, and the purple one, I can't remember where that one came from. The brand is on it. I should have read it. So, the supplies, the water is very purple. I'm gonna have to clean my desk. There's paint on it. And here is the old version. Definitely like the newer one better. Tell me, guys, what you think. Leave a comment down below. Also, let me know any ideas for new videos you'd like to see me do. And I hope to see you guys all in my next video.